we put out a call in November for a Thanksgiving mailbag episode and got so many messages that we actually had a whole bunch left over. So if you sent something in for that Thanksgiving mailbag episode and it didn't get on the air, you're probably going to hear it tonight because we wanted to make sure that as the end of the year wraps up, we actually make sure we address all of these, we answer all of your questions, and we give you guys a little bit of a look into the kinds of questions we get asked.
Mm-hmm. And again, with this incredible cast of volunteers, we've got some wonderful folks to help us out with the heavy lift. So let's go ahead and run that first clip.
The following was sent anonymously. Where's the line between not doing something sexual because you're uncomfortable with it or you don't like doing it and doing it anyway to please your partner? I want to be clear, I am not talking about a situation where the partner is pressuring you or where the sexual act causes pain or trauma. For instance, if the partner likes a certain position and you don't, I understand that you can always do other things, but it seems unfair that one partner gets to dictate the entire scope of the sexual relationship based on discomfort that does not come from pain or trauma, etc. I guess, where's the line for making sacrifices and compromises that are inherent to the relationship?
All right, V, what do you think? You know, we definitely want to be respectful about putting pressure on people, but I guess I hear maybe the unspoken or sort of the implicit feeling that somebody's sexual needs are maybe being dismissed or ignored because of like some vague or nebulous idea of discomfort. I don't know. Where do you come down on this?
Yeah. The thing that I go back to here very often is the idea that you can be enthusiastically consenting to something and not actually be into it necessarily. So like you can fully consent to doing something and it is totally okay, even if you maybe wouldn't have had the idea that night, or maybe you're kind of tired, but you really want your partner to be happy. So yeah, you're going to enthusiastically consent to having sex with them, or, you know, giving them a blowjob or something, right? Like this is not something that you are required to be just as sexually into, just as heightened, just as thirsty as your partner all the time. That's an unreasonable thing to expect in a partnership, especially a long-term one. So I think that on the one hand, and I think, Christy, you are well equipped to dive into maybe the negotiation and communication element here, but I just want to raise that flag and say, just because you might not have thought of it or you might not be fully into it, doesn't mean that it's non-consensual. You have fully formed opinions and wants and needs, and you can make the decision fully consensually, enthusiastically, and happily to set those aside for your partner if you think that that will make them happy. So I think the issue here certainly should not be I feel guilty or bad, or like I'm allowing myself to be stepped on or manipulated if I do things I don't want to do in bed, because everyone does that at some point, right? And it's not necessarily something that reneges the consent element.
Yeah, if you've ever watched an episode of Paw Patrol, you know that you can enthusiastically consent to something without actually enjoying it in any kind of meaningful way. And yeah, I don't know that you want to be having a lot of sex that you don't want to be having, but I think that you have permission to. And so what it really comes down to is respecting your partner when they say like, no, this is not for me, and no, I don't want to do this, not nagging or pushing or prodding or cajoling on that, while also being the type of partner that is good giving in game. You know, Dan Savage's concept of being GGG. You always want to be with somebody who is, you know, good in bed. That's kind of a sexy thing to prioritize. Somebody who's giving, somebody who's willing to be compassionate and thoughtful and not selfish, but who's also game for anything. And that doesn't mean anything, but that is willing to do the thing that you want to do, that's willing to watch the movie with you, even if it's not their preference, that's willing to drive around looking at Christmas lights with you, even if they find that incredibly boring. Like, it's okay to be doing these things, even if they're not your first choice. But I guess the sense I get from this email is that there is not a lot of maybe open communication and like
Yeah.
loving compassion being discussed easily and casually. And I have to assume that that is something that exists outside of the bedroom as well. I don't mean to like jump in and tell a stranger about the relationship by reading between the lines here, but I do know that if you're not comfortable talking and doing nice things for each other and being compassionate in those ways outside of the bedroom, that you're definitely not going to find those communication skills in the bedroom. Beyond that, if it is kind of localized to sexuality, there's probably some shame being involved, maybe some avoidance. Maybe you use sort of the shame of sex or the shame around consent and the discomfort that goes with that as a way of shutting down communication. And I think that the writer of this needs to just be willing to accept the relationship that they have or work to change it. And I know that that's really all the options that there are, but I don't know that this needs to be centered around consent so much as communication and compassion.
I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, communication is key, and it can be rough at first, right? Like, a lot of us are not taught to communicate around sex. It's
Hmm.
something you're either good at or you're not, and you either do it or you don't, and you're kind of like shy and bashful about it, and you're not supposed to talk about it. But yeah, it is extremely important to be able to say, "Hey, this thing I'm not really crazy about." And there's probably a reason, right? Like, maybe it makes you feel a little bit too exposed, or maybe it centers on a part of your body that you have shame around or just don't really like very much. And so exploring that with your partner can also help, and say, "Hey, I don't like," let's give an example. "I don't like doing doggy style because I don't like my butt." Right? And I know that you're right there, you're looking at it like it's front and center for you, and that makes me feel unconscious, and I get up in my head about it, right? And so maybe having that honesty, that radical honesty there, and say, "Hey, this is why." Not just, "I don't like this," not just, "This isn't for me," but, "Hey, this is the reason that I'm pinpointing as the problem here." And hopefully that'll get down to the deeper root of things as well, and allow you to have a bigger conversation about things beyond just the position.
Yeah. Well said.